Hello, Montana, and hello, world. This is Chris Hislop, the Executive Director at the Montana World Affairs Council, bringing you another episode of Connect Montana, where we bring the world to Montana and Montana to the world. This week, we're celebrating the International Day of Peace, which is September 21st. The International Day of Peace is devoted to commemorating and strengthening the ideals of peace among and within people and nations all over the world. And we're doing this in partnership with our friends at the U.S. Institute of Peace, who are undertaking the Peace Day Challenge. So check that out at hashtag Peace Day Challenge. We also bring this thanks to our generous sponsors at Stockman Bank, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, and Allegiance. Without them, we couldn't bring you this very high quality content, so thank you to them. And also this week, we're working closely with our local partners at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. Let me introduce our guest today. Mr. Sarhang Hamasaeed is the Director of Middle East Programs at the U.S. Institute of Peace. His areas of focus include political and policy analysis, conflict analysis, dialogue processes, reconciliation and post-reconciliation stabilization, and ethnic and religious minorities. He's a member of the Task Force on the Future of Iraq and was a member of the Rebuilding Society's working group under the Middle East Strategy Task Force, both initiatives by the Atlantic Council's Rafiq Hariri Center for the Middle East. He regularly gives a lecture at the Foreign Service Institute on ISIL and challenges to governance in Iraq. As a Deputy Director General at the Council of Ministers of the Kurdistan Regional Government of Iraq in 2008 and 2009, Hamasaeed managed strategic government modernization initiatives through information technology with the goal of helping improve governance and service delivery. He holds a master's degree in international development policy from Duke University and is a Fulbright alumnus. Mr. Hamasaeed, you are very welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Chris. It is definitely a pleasure to be with you today. Good afternoon to our viewers. I want to give a special thank you to the Montana World Affairs Council for hosting this discussion and for your previous work with USIP's public education team as they visited Missoula, Bozeman in the past few years to engage students and educators. As you said, today's special series is inspired by the International Day of Peace, recognized each year on September 21st. USIP marks the day with what we call the Peace Day Challenge, inviting everyone around the world to do something practical, big or small, to build peace in every day. People can learn about that more at usip.org and share their involvement using hashtag Peace Day Challenge. For those who don't know, the United States Institute of Peace, or USIP, is this country's national, nonpartisan, independent institute, founded and funded by Congress and dedicated to the proposition that peace is possible, peace is practical, peace is vital for US and global security. We work every day to prevent, mitigate, and resolve violent conflict in some of the most complex and conflict-affected regions around the world, from the Sahel and Horn of Africa to the Middle East, Asia, and Latin America. You can put USIP's work into three main buckets. One is research, analysis, and informing policy and the public. And second, building capacity of individuals and institutions, mostly non-governmental, in conflict analysis, designing dialogue processes, facilitating dialogues among disputing parties and other relevant areas. And the third lane of our work is where we combine the knowledge that we gained and the capacity that we built into dialogue processes and other initiatives that offer alternatives to violence. For the discussion today, I'm going to focus on Iraq, which is one of USIP's priority countries. USIP has been engaged in Iraq uninterrupted since 2003. To understand the relevance of USIP's work there, I think some context would be helpful. If we start in 2003, when the US-led military intervention removed Iraq's brutal dictator Saddam Hussein from power. The country has been since then in a challenging state of transition from totalitarian rule, genocide and human rights violations, and state-controlled economy towards democracy, multi-party and federal system enshrined in a new constitution, holding elections, and trying to overcome a painful past. Along with those successes also came very tragic challenges, such as strong regional influence and interference, sectarian violence, terrorist organizations and attacks, and that resulted in the loss of tens of thousands of lives, displacement of millions of Iraqis, and economic and financial hardships, and much more. For example, in the summer of 2014, Iraq lost 1/3 of its territories to the terrorist organization ISIS in a matter of days, to then retake in years through hard-fought battles by the Iraqis and with significant support from the US-led global coalition to defeat ISIS. During Iraq's rocky transition, USIP and its Iraqi partners have forged agreements between local communities to reduce communal tensions, prevent violence, and support the safe and voluntary return of displaced Iraqis. Since 2007, we have facilitated dialogue processes that culminated in 9 agreements in the most complex provinces of Iraq. 6 of those were in areas liberated from ISIS. I'll come back to unpack one of those, but for now, I want to give you a picture of that. And today, our work on the ground supports religious and ethnic minority communities, such as Christians, Yazidis, Shabak, and others in the Nineveh province in the north, as they recover from the devastation left behind by ISIS and its acts of genocide. USIP is also supporting communal dialogue and analytical work in Anbar province in the west of Iraq and Basra province in the south. So now let me take you for a bit of a deeper dive by giving you an example from our work in Tal Afar, Iraq. Tal Afar is a city located in northwestern Iraq, close to the Syrian border and Mosul city. Tal Afar's population range between 200,000 to 150,000 people, mostly Turkomans, one of the ethnic minority communities of Iraq, comprised of Shia Muslim Turkomans and Sunni Muslim Turkomans. Tal Afar was captured by ISIS in June 2014, and which led to the displacement of thousands of families from the city. The city was liberated from ISIS in August of 2017, so 3 years after it was lost to ISIS. The sectarian mix of the city has been entangled in interests beyond Iraq's borders. For example, Turkey considers itself the protector of Turkoman interests, particularly the Sunni Turkomans, while Iran and its allies come on the side of the Shia Turkomans. At USIP, we knew that Tal Afar will be a complicated case during liberation, return of displaced population, and also peaceful coexistence afterwards. That's why early on, we invested in research to hear from the Turkoman community directly about their perceptions of drivers of conflict and reconciliation in Tal Afar. The report was published in July 2017, before the liberation of the city, and it's available on the USIP website for those who may be interested. At the request of the then National Reconciliation Committee of the Government of Iraq, USIP started a dialogue process engaging a wide range of actors, including tribal, religious, and other community leaders, including officials from the government of Iraq, United States, and Turkey, and also the United Nations and others. The local dialogues were facilitated by Iraqis that USIP had trained, and Senate for Peacebuilding, a national Iraqi peacebuilding organization that USIP also supported its foundation and growth. After months of hard work, we concluded that an agreement at the full district level in Tal Afar would not be possible. Therefore, changed course and focused our energy where we could have a win. In August 2018, we were successful in concluding the process by a peace accord in Ayadiyah district. The agreement encouraged international organizations to invest in services and other projects needed to enable results and stabilize the area. And people have started to return. Then in August 14, 2020, so just last month, despite the challenges presented by the coronavirus, we were successful in facilitating a second agreement, this time on the center of the Tel Afar district. More than 21 tribal, community, and government leaders from Tel Afar signed an agreement, a peace agreement. This second stage was enabled by funds from the United States Agency for International Development, USAID. As you can see, the agreement was the result of almost 4 years of hard work at dialogue and facilitated consultations by USIP and its partners, with layers from the local to the national to the international levels. Current efforts are focused on implementing the agreement reached, which includes removing barriers to the return of over 60,000 refugees who are now in Turkey and others who are internally displaced in the Nineveh province. Then help balance the representation of the local community representation, local administration, and hoping to result in better security. The return of displaced populations is particularly important because those displaced populations face the risks of COVID-19 in displacement camps. They face the risk of radicalization in addition to other forms of vulnerability. The USIP team and our partners in Iraq are particularly proud that we were successful in ensuring that not only the interests of women are represented in the dialogue process, but that women also participate themselves directly, which is groundbreaking in itself in highly conservative and tribal communities of Iraq. Rebuilding social contract and cohesion at the community level helps with preventing extremist organizations like ISIS from recruiting and taking root, and addresses communal cleavages that unwanted external actors exploit. These peace-building efforts help consolidate the military gains against ISIS, prevent the US military from being pulled back in again, and save US and our allies' taxpayers money by minimizing the need for future military response, humanitarian assistance, and reconstruction. With that, I'll stop here and happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Sarhang. I mean, it's a fascinating view that many of us don't get regarding a kind of local aspects or of the peacemaking and peace building process. You also mentioned minorities. So if I could just start with that, I'd like to pick up on this because it's been a theme with both your colleague, Dr. Keenest, and Dennis McNamara yesterday, talking about, you know, those who are involved and affected by conflict ought to have a voice in its resolution. And you brought that up as well. Now, in your case, I think you mentioned some ethnic and religious minorities. From your perspective, Sarhang, why is this important? Why do you need to have all voices in on this? Why isn't it enough simply to talk to, say, the two parties or the multiple parties in conflict, i.e. the people with the guns?
Well, this is a great question. So first, these communities, the Christians, the Yazidis, the Shabak, and others, are indigenous people to the land. So they have been there over the millennia, and they have the right to the country, to the land, and to fair participation. Second, they are very vulnerable because when the bigger actors fight, they do not pay attention to these communities. They don't get the services they need to survive. They don't get the economic resources that they need. And actually the conflict of the big actors are destructive and destroy their communities and displace them. So they have a right to be at the table as citizens, equal citizens, and be protected, and also tell the bigger actors who are not paying attention to them that they have the right to life, they have the right to representation, and they are a partner in the country, and they are entitled to the resources in the country in terms of the natural resource of the country, but also that some legislations that create practices of the government or governance that violates their right and that poses risks to their very existence. The Christian community would tell you that in 2003, there were about 1.5 million Christians in Iraq. Today, unfortunately, that number has dropped below 200,000. That threatens their very existence in Iraq. So they do need to be at the table.
I just want to remind our participants, feel free to chat in questions to Sarhang, either to me privately or to everyone. Here's one from one of our participants. You talked about the 4 years of effort that went into one agreement, but what comes after implementation? How do you keep it going?
That's a great question. What we do usually set up follow-up committees to implement, where there are those who will work with the tribal leaders to make sure that they uphold their commitment. When there are community barriers to the return, that they will work through those issues. Second, they will work with the local government when the security vetting for those people to check that they are not ISIS and they have not been involved in crimes. Those vettings will happen, and then once the process this will happen efficiently, fairly, and once that is done, then actually the necessary authorizations are provided for those people to come back. And then when people go home, Iraq, unfortunately, is facing a severe financial crisis and economic crisis. There is not enough resources to rebuild homes and services, so they will have to navigate through difficult priorities, and this is what the follow-up enables. So Tal Afar, this recent agreement is more recent, so it has not practically led to return, but the hope is it will lead to that. And the other example, more wide known in Iraq, is our work in 2014 and 2015 after what was called the Camp Spiker massacre that enabled the return of over 600,000 people to the province, that led to restoring relations among the community, where students from other provinces were able to go back to the area where the massacre happened, and normal life would be restored.
Here's another one from our audience. What is the current status of Kurds in Iraq?
Sorry, the voice was breaking. The Kurds, did you mean?
Yeah, what is the current status of the Kurds in Iraq?
Well, the Kurds live in mostly the northern part of the country. They have what they call the Kurdistan Regional Government, a federal entity within the structure of the Iraqi government. They have a regional parliament and they have a regional presidency, and they are involved in the government in Baghdad. So the president of Iraq is an ethnic Kurd. The foreign minister of Iraq is a Kurd. So they are participating in the executive branch, the judicial branch, and the legislative. They had their disagreements with Baghdad over the implementation of the constitution, over allocation of resources, and over territories they call disputed. Those led to moments of tensions, and the Kurds actually going for a vote on independence in 2017, which was the Kurds predominantly voted yes, but the Iraqi government and the international community opposed, so that did not result in a change of the political structure. Since then, relations have normalized, but the challenges are there, and they are working through them through dialogue.
Thank you, Sarhang. A question from me. In situations of conflict, a conundrum emerges, and I think it comes out in very sharp relief when we talk about peace building and peacemaking. And it would sound something like this. You have a society or communities who are deeply affected by conflict. You know, in so many ways. You talked about displacement being one, but there are so many, and many that are unseen: mistrust and you know, these kinds of problems among and between people and communities. So on one hand, social fabric is often damaged or torn, um, making the society, making it weak and difficult for it to reach some agreement, to reach some kind of peace agreement. At the same time, it's really only those people who are actually there and deeply affected by that conflict who can really establish a lasting peace. So it's a bit of a conundrum that, you know, it's difficult for them to do it, yet they're the only ones who can. And so I wonder if you could share some of your views on that conundrum and how, you know, putting, I think empowering local communities to be an important part of these agreements makes a difference.
Right. Now that's a very, very important points that you raised. So I mean, it is a fact. I mean, my conclusion, we're working on Iraq and other countries, is that no solution would work if the people who are directly either party or affected by the conflict are part of the solution. So a solution has to work for all parties. Otherwise, it will not work. And it is usually at the local level where most of the vulnerability lies. This is where a terrorist organization, a militia, an armed group would go and recruit and will exploit those grievances, or if there are poor governance, they will be exploited. So that angle is important to be present. But also, it is true that it has been proven that oftentimes those communities are unable to fix those problems on their own, because either the distrust has gotten to a level where they need help to bring them back from that state, or they do not have the skills and know-how to do this. And this is where the help of the international community and international organizations come in. And then you have the complicated geopolitical dynamics, like in the case of Iraq, where Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and others have ethnic and religious and extensions into Iraq, and they work on those to advance their interest. Some of them scale up to the level of interference that backfire. So it's my experience that a solution requires the Iraqis and those communities themselves, but it also requires a change of action from those external actors, and it also requires the help of the international community. One of them would not be enough. It will require the collective, all these three lanes.
Here's another question from a participant. I'll try to paraphrase it the best I can. I think most of us are used to or have seen, you know, on the news, a international peace agreement whereby a major power, whether that's the United States or another country, quote unquote, brokers a peace and is seen to be the kind of middle person between two opposing sides, if you will. But you mentioned in your last answer there that there is a role for the international community somehow. I mean, possibly not all things can be done locally, and that organizations like USIP and others often work directly to support the basic ability of communities to even come to a negotiation themselves. Could you talk a little bit more about the role of USIP and maybe more broadly, the role of the international community on the ground when it comes to this kind of work?
Right. No, that's another great point. So as I also mentioned in my remarks, I mean, USIP's approach is to make sure to help the parties involved are part of the process, because incomplete process, you leave a community behind, it will lead to problems. So there has to be an inclusive process. Second, we do our assessments and research so that everybody hopefully will operate from the same facts, not as the opinions and the perceptions they have about each other, but we distill to specific practical issues that matters to their lives. We offer that. And then the second, we know that sustainable solutions come for when the communities themselves figure out how to resolve those issues themselves. So we help with creating capacity from those communities themselves. That's why we invested in what we call the Network of Iraqi Facilitators and Senate for Peace Building, a national organization. The situation changes, and sometimes the Iraqis themselves, and as I mentioned, the case of the Camp Spiker dialogues, the communities, the Sunnis and the Shia of Iraq had such a level of low trust and tensions, they couldn't do it on their own. They needed an external actor who was not involved in the politics and the issues of the community to come help them. And the Iraqi capacity needed a boost from additional expertise that USIP provided. And that's what we try to do. But brokered deals, brokered peace agreements are as good as their implementation. And this is why a good number of them, not ours, in practice, may not go through because there is no follow-up on the implementation. Or it's not stemming from a good design from the actors who need to be there, were not there. So follow-up on those is important. And this is where the international community is usually relied on because there is expertise needed for the implementation. And second, the international community could be a neutral or impartial actor to say, okay, well, this is where the agreement is deviating from what was agreed. Not to be a judge, but to help the actors to bring it back to course. And third is sometimes there are resources that need to be provided to help with those implementations. So Iraq right now, for example, does not have the resources to rebuild. There is a need for some international assistance. In northeastern Syria, the local economy does not have the capacity to pay everything for itself. There is some need for the international community to help.
Well, Sarhang, I mean, it's an incredibly rich discussion that we could continue for hours and hours, no doubt. But I really appreciate the way in which you brought these very key points when we're talking about the role of local initiatives in peace building. And I found that very rich and very insightful. So thank you for all that. I'm just going to hand back to you if you have any last comments.
Yeah, so my key comment probably is that, I mean, we are at a time where communities are looking inward to deal with the coronavirus and the second and third order effects. They are creating economic crises. So it may be, I mean, even before the coronavirus, usually questions are raised of why do we care about communities that are far away? Why will they continue to fight themselves? Why should we do it for them? My experience is that in those communities, there is always strong desire to change the status quo. They may be caught in very difficult dynamics. They may not have the know-how, but so they deserve help. There are people who are looking for that help. Second, if we leave some of these issues fester, it will lead to exploitation by terrorist organizations, and it will come back to haunt us down the road. In Iraq, the Iraqi youth, who have come of age after 2003, took to the streets last year, holding their government accountable and demanding an overhaul to the political system where corruption should be ended and the external malign influence should be limited. So there are Iraqis to work with, and we share common interest on security, as I also said in my remarks.
Sarhang, thank you so much again, and special thanks to our good friends at the U.S. Institute of Peace for partnering with us this week to commemorate the International Day of Peace. Remember, check them out at hashtag Peace Day Challenge if you'd like to get some more information. We'd also like to thank again our donors and sponsors who make this possible, from Stockman Bank, the Dennis and Phyllis Washington Foundation, and Allegiance. If you missed anything this week, you can always check out all of our shows on our YouTube channel. Just Google it or go to YouTube and search the Montana World Affairs Council for the other 37 people who have come on talking about interesting and engaging international issues. Next week, we have a very timely week coming up. It is misinformation, disinformation, and fake news. We have 3 international experts, an academic, somebody from the tech sector, and a journalist coming to talk about questions like, what is fake news? Where is it coming from? How can I tell the difference? These experts are going to help us understand and parse what we mean when we talk about misinformation and fake news. So once again, thanks to everybody who joined us this week. Thank you, Sarhang, and thank you, USIP, and our friends at the Jeanette Rankin Peace Center. Have a nice week, and see you next week. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.